Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Normally, a city council by-election is a pretty boring thing. The turnout is always pretty low. Often, there's basically a clear winner well before anyone even votes. Endorsements don't make the news. And yeah, the result is of course important to the residents of that riding. But without the rest of an election, without a mayor's race on the ballot, it's just not very exciting. This one, though, this one's a little different. This one has citywide stakes. It has at least one prominent candidate on the ballot. It's got a handful of opponents, perhaps too many opponents, trying to stop him. And it's got the attention of a former premier and an ex-mayor. It's got a lot of people invested for a little city council by-election. So you, want to know why? I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. This is The Big Story. Ben Spurr is the City Hall bureau chief for the Toronto Star. He's covering a little bit of a strange upcoming by-election, Ben.
Yeah, it's certainly more interesting than your average city by-election.
Okay, so for listeners outside of Toronto first, maybe just tell us about where it's happening, the riding of Don Valley West. What's that riding like? And, if there is a trend, how has it traditionally trended for city councillors?
So, Don Valley West is to kind of the northeast of downtown Toronto in North York. It's a diverse riding, both economically and culturally. It has some of the wealthiest residential neighborhoods in Toronto, and then the likes of Leaside and the Bridle Path, but also includes places like Thorncliffe Park, which is a really unique, densely populated apartment community that's home to a lot of new immigrants in Toronto. And it's a relatively new riding. It's been represented since its inception in 2018 by Jay Robinson, who died earlier this year. And that's actually why the by-election was called to fill her empty seat. But it does have a history with Liberals at other levels of government. It's represented right now, both federally and provincially, by Liberals and former Premier Kathleen Wynne represented it for close to 2 decades, I think, before she retired from politics.
And I mean, normally we're a national podcast. We wouldn't cover a city council by-election, but what caught your eye, and by extension our eye, about this one?
Yeah, so as you say, by-elections are usually pretty low-key, low-turnout affairs at all levels of government, but in particular at the city level of government. But this one, what caught my eye was some of the players that are involved already or could be involved, because I kept hearing that some local political heavyweights, including former Premier Kathleen Wynne and former Mayor John Tory, were already involved in Wynne's case or could be getting involved in John Tory's case, who we understand that Tory is being asked to endorse candidates across the spectrum here in this race. Plus, you have a former mayoral candidate in Anthony Furey, who's also running in this election. So just seemed like there was a lot more kind of maneuvering behind the scenes and a lot more, stakes involved in this election than your average city by-election.
You mentioned Anthony Furey as a former mayoral candidate, but in general, I guess he's a real key player in this. Who is he? How did he come to be in politics?
So, yeah, I think a lot of people might know him as a former Toronto Sun columnist. He left that job a little while ago to become editorial director of the news branch of a right-wing charity called True North. And both at that site and I think while he was at the Sun, some of the commentary that he's been involved with publishing, either writing himself or publishing at True North, have been, fairly controversial. The site itself, True North, put a focus on culture war issues like drag queen story hours and trans activism and going after so-called woke politics. But even before that, as a Toronto Sun columnist, he wrote some columns that drew attention. He focused a lot on what he described as the threat of political Islam. He's cast doubt at times whether Islam can be practiced peacefully as a religion. In the wake of that massacre in Quebec City a few years ago, he made comments that a government motion condemning Islamophobia might lead to a, quote, compliant with Sharia law. So kind of raising the specter that, Canadians would be forced to comply with religious law. So a lot of these statements and his commentary over time struck a lot of people, I think, as Islamophobic itself, raised some concerns about the kind of extreme viewpoints, I think, that a lot of people will consider he was espousing. I think the other thing to note is that he ran last year in the mayoral by-election to replace John Tory, and he came in a surprising fourth place. He kind of came out of nowhere. I don't think a lot of people expected him to do as well as he did, and he ran a campaign that didn't focus so much on these kind of culture war issues, but he talked about a tough on crime approach, including increased police spending, clearing homeless encampments, cracking down on public drug use. That seemed to resonate with a significant portion of Toronto voters.
Okay, so, I mean, the person you've described there and the views he's espoused in the past doesn't really seem, just from an outsider looking in, to be a fit with a riding that is liberal provincially and federally, that is home to a ton of new Canadians. Why are people concerned about Furey winning this riding then?
Yeah, so I mean, some of his opponents do say he doesn't have a chance, and he's not going to do great here. In the mayoral election, he didn't do too well in this riding, I believe, compared to some of the other parts of the city. But his opponents, I think, disagree with his politics for one thing, and say that the approach that he's espoused, his viewpoints, particularly on multiculturalism and related issues, don't fit well with the residents of this ward. But also the other, I think, dynamic going on here is that if he were to win a seat on council, it would give him a pretty big political platform. And I think there's a lot of speculation that he hasn't done anything to douse that he will run for mayor in the next election, which is scheduled for 2026. So I think people who are worried about his type of politics are concerned not just that he might be, one voice on council, but could use that to mount a potentially successful mayoral campaign. And I think that's what has some people particularly concerned here.
Now, so far, all of this has been, standard politics. You either approve of his views or you don't, and you don't want him to win. But there's another dynamic going on here that could sort of clear a lane for him, right? Like, what's happening in this campaign?
Right. So as we say, by-elections are typically really low turnout affairs. So what could give him a path here is splitting the vote among several similarly ideologically similar candidates who are running against him. So there are 15 total candidates who have signed up so far. But the piece that I wrote for the Star recently focused on 3 candidates who all have pretty strong liberal links. So that includes Drew Jane, who has some experience at City Hall working for the TTC chair's office, but he also worked for the local Liberal MPP before that, and is actually a vice president of the local Ontario Liberal Party riding association. Then you have Evan Sambasivam, who his campaign manager is a prominent organizer for the federal Liberals in Ontario. He also has family ties to the Liberals. He's the nephew of former Deputy Premier Deb Matthews. And then you have Rachel Chernos-Lynn, who is the current board chair of the Toronto District School Board. And she has some Liberal ties in that the person running fundraising for her campaign is the partner of former Premier Kathleen Wynne, and she has some other Liberals who have been helping out on her campaign as well. So I think the concern here is that for opponents of Anthony Furey, for supporters of some of these candidates, is that in a by-election where turnout is so low, if votes for several like-minded voters are spread across these 3 candidates, it could mean that none of them have enough to put them over the top, and does give a path to victory to Furey.
And so what is going on right now behind the scenes that you were looking into and that people are finding pretty interesting, again, for like a nothing by-election, or at least traditionally in November?
Right. So what we reported in the Star is that the former premier, Kathleen Wynne, has had conversations with all three of those Liberal-linked candidates that I mentioned to talk about the importance of not splitting the vote. I understand the Liberal MPP for the riding, Stephanie Bowman, has had similar conversations. How exactly those conversations went depends on who you ask. The former premier told me, she hasn't asked anyone to drop out of the race. She says that she hasn't, publicly declared who she's going to support. She respects anyone who runs for office, and she's just said, that she's concerned about this vote splitting issue. However, the campaign for at least one of the candidates, Drew Jane, said that he understands their conversation that Wynne wanted him to not get in the race, that she wanted him to step aside, and he says he's not going to do that. And it does seem, given Wynne's kind of secondhand links to Chernos Lynn, the current school board chair, it does seem like Wynne is positioning herself to announce her public support for that candidate, who she does already say she believes has the best experience, etc. So it just seems like there's a bit of jockeying behind the scenes here of a fairly strong political figure and the former premier trying to kind of get these candidates to sort themselves out, I guess, and to ensure that they're not splitting the vote. The other thing we understand is happening is that both the campaign of Rachel Chernos Lynn and Anthony Furey, interestingly, have both reached out to former Mayor John Tory for his endorsement in this race. And I think that's interesting just to see that both, two candidates with pretty divergent political views seem to think that John Tory might help them out. When I spoke with John Tory, he said that he hasn't made a decision yet on whether or if he would jump in the race, but you can see that, even though he resigned under a bit of a cloud last year, he's still a popular politician in this city, and who he decides to support, if anybody, could go a long way to helping them win.
What do the candidates themselves, the three sort of liberal adjacent, I guess, candidates, say about that possibility of vote splitting and the desire, I guess, probably from all of them for one or both of the others to get out of the race and give one of them a better chance of winning?
Yeah, I mean, so both Drew Jane and Edmund Sambasivam, when I spoke to them, they reiterated that they had no intention of getting out of the race. They feel like they're the best candidates to win this election. I mean, that's why you run, right? You don't run thinking that you don't have a good chance of winning. And, they didn't want to, they told me they have no intention of getting out. They feel that, they're every day campaigning already. And whether or not someone like Kathleen Wynne backs another candidate, they say that, while they respect her, they're not going to get out at anyone else's behest. So you do have this dynamic going on where these three candidates all feel like they're the best ones to win this election. And so they're saying that they're going to beat Furey, all of them. And some of I think it was Drew Jane told me, he doesn't think that Furey is actually a strong candidate here. Furey doesn't live in the riding. He didn't do great in the mayoral by-election here, and that he may not be the threat that some are painting him out to be.
What do they think about the rumors, or at least the reports, of this kind of politicking going on behind the scenes from Wynne and potentially, I guess, publicly from Wynne and Tory very soon? This is somewhat unusual in a race like this, right?
Right. It's certainly unusual that such high-profile figures would be involved, I think. But they're saying that they're just focused on their campaign, right? I think that's what you say when you're running in an election. You say that you're the ones who are going to win, and you're going to keep your head down and just keep campaigning. So, as I say, Evan Sambasivam, he told me that when he spoke with the former premier, and he certainly respects her opinion, and didn't seem to be, too put out, I guess, or too upset about any involvement from her, but just said that, I'm sticking to my guns. I'm going to keep campaigning here because I'm the best one who's has the best chance of winning.
What about current politicians that actually have a stake in the outcome of this election? Has Mayor Chow's office gotten involved? Is she going to endorse a candidate here? Does she care about Anthony Furey potentially being on her council?
Yeah, it's interesting for all the prominent politicians that are involved. As far as we can tell so far, the mayor's office has not stepped in to this race in any significant way. And that could be because Olivia Chow has other things on her mind. She's running the city and maybe isn't so inclined to step in. But I think another potential reading of that is that it may not be so bad for the mayor to have someone like Anthony Furey on council. If he was to be elected, you could bet that he would take every opportunity to attack her from the right of the spectrum. And I think that she might see that as advantageous. That would allow her to display herself as a really strong progressive. And so it may not be the end of the world for her if she has an opponent like that sitting across from her in the council chamber.
If I had to put you on the spot and ask you to guess, and I know you don't have any reporting on this yet, but you're obviously very plugged in down at City Hall and you've been through a lot of these. Will all three Liberal candidates on the ballot be on the ballot in November, or what might convince one or two of them to actually drop out?
Yeah, it's really tough to say. The deadline to drop out of the race is September 19th, so that's a few days away now. So we'll be watching closely over the next few days whether anything changes in terms of who wants to stay in and if anyone wants to get out. If Kathleen Wynne comes out and endorses Rachel Chernow-Slynn, that might make it seem to the other two candidates that they have less of a chance. I think what would make that even more forceful, of course, is if John Tory and Kathleen Wynne both endorsed Chernow-Slynn. If there was some kind of joint endorsement, that would really put the seal of, two fairly prominent politicians on her campaign and make it harder, I think, for the other two to position themselves as the best placed candidate. But, a lot can happen in politics in a couple of weeks, even in a normally sleepy by-election. So really tough to say whether or not anyone will get out. And as I say, all the candidates are telling me right now that they have no intention of stepping aside. And I think you'll hear them keep saying that until something happens and they change their mind, if that happens at all. But yeah, it's like that's something that we're going to be watching.
Ben, thank you so much for this.
Thanks so much for taking the time.
Ben Spurr, City Hall Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. That was The Big Story. For more, you can head to thebigstorypodcast.ca. You will probably find precisely 0 other stories in our 1,500 plus archives about city council by-elections, so it's always nice to try something new. You can send us feedback by writing to hello@thebigstorypodcast, or you can call us up and leave a voicemail, 416-935-5935. The Big Story is available in all your favorite podcast players, including Seeker, Seekr, and on smart speakers if you ask them to play the Big Story podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. We'll talk tomorrow.